for over 15 years. He has a rich experience in software engineering, agile coaching, training, and consulting. And he's going to talk about a topic that I like to say is a little controversial and requires a lot of change. So he's going to help us. We all have been into the IT service sector, and we all understand the contracting models that we have in the sector right now. So Sumeet is going to help us understand if there is any agile contracts, or if we are making our contracts agile, whichever way you want to call it. So handing it over to you, Sumeet.
Sumeet, you're on mute.
You're on mute, yeah.
Yes. There's a general stuff that happens with me. Okay. If I'm audible to you guys, I'm sure I'll be audible to rest of the people also, correct?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, okay, that is awesome. Okay. So thanks for the introduction, Megha. I don't know whether I have written so much about me, but okay, you must have picked up from somewhere. But thanks very much. I never knew that I know so many things. Okay, so as you mentioned, that okay, my topic is more about contracts in complex environment, and also to understand, are there any agile contracts, or our contracts need to have an element of agile? Okay, and I also noticed, because I was a participant sometime back, a lot of people were discussing. So feel free to share if at all you guys are having any topics on the agile contracting with the people who are listening. And if at all you're having any specific question, difficult question, post it directly to me on my email ID. And if at all you're having easy questions, post it over here. Okay. So a quick introduction about me. It's already been mentioned that I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I'm actually a CEO of a company named as Agile Media. I'm partner consultant over there, and also I'm a safe program consultant. You can connect to me. You can take a screenshot, whatever you want to do that. That's fine. Okay. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of this slide. This is a manifesto for Agile software development. The third point says customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Now, the word contract is something which is very important when one work in a client and supplier mode. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of your contract model in which you are working right now. But if at all you're working in a captive, like e-commerce business, platform, banks, manufacturing organizations, or medical companies, and in different geographies also, then there are contractual obligations on your work, which are imposed by maybe the law of that country, particular country, like your statement of work, your rate card, even your offer letter are also a kind of contract or an agreement between you and the company who is employing you. But we consider financials as the most important part of contract when the money comes. So once we get an offer, the first thing we usually check in the contract is the salary and its breakup. And if you're happy, then we are not much bothered about rest of the words which are written in the contract or the offer letter, because we know the rest of the contract is usually the same as your previous organization, so we don't bother much. And sometimes you get surprises when you actually get into a problem with your current employer, or when you are leaving the organization, or when company is asking you to leave. Then you actually get to know what was there in the contract and how legally you are obligated to that. So contract is the most important aspect between the two parties who decide to work together. Now, if we talk about definition, so by definition, the contract is a written or a spoken agreement, especially one concerning employment, sales, tenancy, that is intended to be enforceable by law. The word is enforceable. See, when I was working, it's not mean that I'm not working now, I'm working now also. I mean to say, when I was working with the previous organization, then I never bothered to read any contracts, say offer letter. And trust me, sometimes I got surprises because of me not going through the contractual obligations. But that was only when we had a trouble between the parties. But now, being a CEO, I do take legal advices before I get into any contract or agreements. Reason being, it is very important to understand that what actions to be taken or what needs to be considered when you get into an issue. Your contract comes into action only when you get into some issues. Now, this is something we are talking about just two parties and the contractual obligations. But how about when two parties get involved to produce something, to sell it in the market and to make money? Now, the money part, when the money part comes into the picture, I mean, to develop something that can be sold as a commodity to earn profit, then how the contractual stuff works. Now, the variables like how the product will get developed. What about the intellectual property? How about the sensitive information? How you deal with that? Now, there are a lot of variables that come into existence. And then how to deal with those variables is what your contract defines. So, see, when we talk about the product development in a complex environment, this is a slide from Scrum. Scrum is based on empiricism. It's all about empirical process. That means transparency, inspection, and adaptation, but with the base as trust. That is the most important part. Now, when we are developing a product that is in complex environment, where we are dealing with uncertainty of the requirements, volatility of the market that we are working in, with the changing technology, then what brings the trust between the client and the supplier to deal with these situations of the VUCA world? That is where one of the elements is a contract that plays a bigger part. Now, why we need a contract? That's another part. See, when we say we need to have a contract between parties, then we're talking about client who wants to get a product developed and a supplier who will help produce that product. Now, product development in complex environment, say using Scrum for instance, needs empiricism and basis of which is trust, as I was mentioning. So when we say that the client and supplier needs to sign a contract, then are we trying to say that there are trust issues between the parties? If no, if there are no trust issues, then do they really need to have a contract? And if yes, then does contract build trust? Now, this is a question. I'll just share an example. Sometime I'm not able to spend much time with my kids, my daughter, elder daughter. So my daughter wanted my time and I told, okay, yes, I will give you my time. That's not a problem for one Sunday. So I had an oral agreement with my daughter, based on the trust we both have. Then I told, okay, I will spend time with you on one Sunday. But unfortunately, I missed it. And the agreement was, if I miss that, then I have to buy something for her. And you know what? When I missed that particular agreement, or the contractual agreement I had with my daughter, I ended up buying diamond earrings for her. Because she told, buy something. I will buy something, but she never told what is that something. And I ended up buying a diamond earring, which was almost 50K, but I ended up spending 100,000, 1 lakh. Why? Because I'm having a second daughter also. When I was buying for my elder daughter, my little daughter told, what is for me? Though I was not having any agreement with her, but violating one agreement costed me double the amount. Now, just because the agreement that me and my daughter never had that exclusivity clause, I ended up buying the stuff what she wanted. Now, whenever we get into this kind of agreements, I specifically ask her that, okay, go write it on a paper, bring it over here, we'll sign it. So that I should know that, okay, what is something that you want. So now, it's very important for us to understand that why we actually need contracts. What is the need for the contract? See, when we talk about the product development in a complex environment, then we need the contract. You need a contract, those instead of binding your client and supplier into a legal agreement, but they should actually promote and enable agility. So when we say contract in a VUCA world, then the contract should not be considered as a law enforcement on the way of work, but should create an agreement on managing the risks It's about how we will collaborate, how we'll raise transparency, and what if we need an early termination, how to deal with the changing scope, deliverables, model for the payment, and how about the intellectual property? Who will take a call on the intellectual property? Who will keep it? How they'll keep it? How about the sensitive information? The contracts are actually a working agreement that a client and a supplier agrees and promise to adhere. Now the contracts get action only if there are any challenges during the course of product development. So if at all you are, talk about a Scrum way of working, then one can relate this Scrum teams. One can relate this to a Scrum team's agreement, working agreement. So they create, and there is an understanding that all who signed up will adhere to that working agreement. And as we keep updating and visiting our working team agreements, the same way, the contracts needs to be revisited and needs to be updated to deal with the uncertainties of the product development. Now, when we talk about the types of contract, then there are a variety of contracts available in the market. Some of the contracts, are defined by project management bodies like PMI, Prince2, and there are some custom mades to deal with the situations which are not mentioned by these management bodies. Now, the different kind of contracts that are available in the market are cost plus, unit price, unilateral, bilateral, express contract, adhesion contracts, etc. Now, these contracts will come into life depending upon the kind of work and the kind of market you are dealing with. Now, for the projects and for the product development, the popular known contracts are fixed contracts, fixed price, fixed cost, fixed time kind of stuff, target cost, cost plus or cost reimbursement, you can say, incremental delivery, and the most popular, which is called as time and material. On a lighter note, okay, don't take me too serious now on this thing. On a lighter note, on what concept the contracts come into picture? When I ask this question to myself, that okay, what is the need for the concept of contract? From where this concept came? And I read somewhere that the concept of contract is always to make as much money as possible. When you're thinking about supplier point of view, how much money I can make from this client, you will write in the contract. And from the client point of view, they will be thinking that, okay, how much money I can save from the supplier end. So this is a tug of war. Now, we can also relate, this to an analogy of prisoner's dilemma. I don't know how many of you actually know about that, but this is something which I was reading, and it's a really very interesting topic. So I thought, okay, let me bring it because it talks about collaboration. Now, the prisoner dilemma is a standard example of a game analyzed in the game theory that shows why two completely rational individual bodies or parties might not cooperate, even if it appears that it is in their best interest to do so. So it was originally framed by Merrill Flood and Melvin Dasher while they were working in a company called as RAND in 1950. It was an NGO. Then Albert Tucker formalized the game with prison sentence into that and rewarded a name as Prisoner Dilemma, which presents as follows. Okay, so what it tells is, two members of a criminal gang are arrested and imprisoned. Each prisoner is in solitary confinement with no means of communicating with other. Now, the prosecutor lacks sufficient evidence to convict the pair on the principal charges, but they have enough to convict both of them on the lesser charges. Simultaneously, the prosecutor offers each prisoner a bargain, which says that, okay, each prisoner is given the opportunity either to confess or betray the other by testifying that the other committed the crime, or to cooperate with each other by remaining silent. So in which you will get, in prison for the lesser crime. The possible outcomes that came out is, if A and B each betrays or confess to each other, then each of them serves 5 years in prison. If A betrays B, but B remains silent, then A will be set free and B will serve maybe 20 years of imprisonment. Then comes if A remains silent, but B betrays or confess, then A will serve 20 years in prison and B will set free. And if A and B both remain silent, collaborate, then both of them will serve only 1 year in the prison. See, in a contract game, most of the time, the last option is always ruled out, which is actually a win-win situation for client and supplier, which means collaborate. So there's another theory on the Stupidity Quadrant. It is actually coined by Carlo Cipolla. He was an Italian economic historian who coined this Stupidity Quadrant. Okay, so and he created the laws of stupidity also. So I just taking this concept in reference to present it in a client and supplier behavior. Okay, so when we say positive, it is like benefit to themselves, and negative side is loss to other. So benefit to supplier and loss to client. And another one is like benefit to client and loss to supplier. Now just imagine if the supplier makes the gain for themselves at the cost of client, then these are evil suppliers. And what kind of contracts actually give this flexibility to a supplier? That's a time and material contract. And this often gives the flexibility to the supplier. Hence, when we talk about time and material contract, that requires a great level of trust with the supplier. Client needs to have a great level of trust with the supplier, then only T&M works. In my experience from last 5 years, when I started consulting, I have not come across a situation where if client and suppliers are going to work together for the first time, they have gone with the T&M model. They usually go with the dual stage contracts. So if at all you want to understand what is the dual stage contracts, it's like they'll start with the fixed contract, then over a period of time, they'll gain the trust, and then they'll shift it to time and material. Okay. Now, if the client makes the gain for themselves over the loss of supplier, then your supplier is a careless supplier. And usually the fixed mode contracts actually fall into this category. The moment you're going with a fixed mode contracts, usually the risk is always with the supplier, and then client can make money out of it. Now both the parties are trying to kill each other. That's called as stupidity, that you are not collaborating, you are getting into a blame game, done. Then comes a win-win situation, and that is what tags to the agility in the contracts. There are a variety of contract variants that are available in the market that promotes intelligent behavior, and I will touch on few of the popular ones in the upcoming slides. Because I'm sure I'm going right on the time because I'm not keeping a tab on that.
Absolutely.
Yes, no? Okay, cool.
I'll make sure that you are on time.
Okay, so you will skip the questions.
I think all of them are difficult questions so far. So
Yeah, I know. And all the difficult questions they will ask on the concepts which are not coined by me. It's okay. Let's see. So now, the one which comes first in the list is, everything is fixed. This is one of the most popular stuff and the most favorable also. So what happened in this kind of contracts? Now this type of contract as is breaks the agile principles. What happened? All the risk goes to the supplier end. There's no collaboration. It creates an inability for the client to accept the product early also. It includes a lot of buffer to deal with the uncertainties in the product. A lot of functionality will be added that may not be required sometime. Why? Because there's a very minimum or no room for changes in these kind of contracts. Now, if things goes wrong, then the quality is the first thing that get compromised in these kind of contracts. Though all the risk is on supplier end, but supplier tends to make money with the change requests because you are actually having a separate clause to have a change request in this. Okay, so the other one, in order to have a win-win situation, we need to be, we have to do some tweaks in our traditional contracting approach. When you say we have to do a little tweak in the existing one, so there are some fixed mode contracts that are tweaked to cater to the agility part. So there are different variants in the fixed contracts that can bring win-win situation for the client and the supplier both. Now the first one, which is like fixed plus collaboration. Now in this kind of contracts, both the parties agrees that the original scope is subject to change. Supplier work on most important items first, and then they make a call whether to drop or to extend the contract. But these kind of contract, these kind of variations in the contracts are too fuzzy to pen down in a contract. So usually it happens on a collaboration. You cannot write each and everything in the contract because we are in a complex VUCA world. So it's more about the collaboration. The second variant comes as a progressive fixed. It's like, a rule of venture capital, if you guys are aware of that. It's like, divide the deliverables or the product development into 3 or 4 parts. Then execute one as a fixed everything to produce a maybe minimum viable product with no additional or low priority features. Then go to the market, obtain real hands on information about the system and its usage. Then let client redefines the next phase depending on learning from the results from the release. And if client thinks that the supplier under-deliver, then client can choose to cancel the product development and cut their losses soon. The third variant comes as a competitive sprint, which is based on the lean approach. It is based on Toyota's concurrent approach. What it says that, okay, hire several suppliers at the same time for the first deliverable or phase of the product. The phase when I'm referring, I'm telling that the market deliverable, okay? Then select one of the supplier depending on their deliverables. But we have paid to rest of the people also. Then what we can do, we can incorporate everything that we have learned from the other supplier into the solution. Then the fourth variant comes as an inception. I'm sure a lot of people knows about this. The inception sometimes is also known as consulting contract, which means like during this client contacts a supplier for maybe a couple of weeks to build a product backlog. Supplier then can give a better estimate on how much and when, which is like cost and time. This can also include 1 or 2 development sprints to demonstrate the predictability and the deliverables to the client. And then this variant is very popular among new product development where the level of uncertainty is high. So I've come across these kind of contracts where client will actually bring the supplier. Then I have worked in that kind of environment also. Then we'll help them to with the backlog. Then we'll run a couple of sprints just to show that okay, yes, the value can be delivered. We validate that value. And then, depending upon the results, the further course of actions comes into the picture. The fifth variant, which is again very popular, it is a money for nothing, change for free. It is coined by Jeff Sutherland actually. Now this comes as an agreement that the client can call the project done anytime, paying the supplier a percentage, let's say 20% on the cancelled scope. Now you guys got a very big scope that, okay, there are like 100 items that you have to deliver. And after 50th item, you figured it out that, okay, yes, my product achieved the value that I wanted to achieve. Now I do not want to continue. Then remaining 50 items that was, estimated on cost, maybe like 20% of that client gives to the supplier for doing nothing. That's called as money for nothing. And then client says 80% of the functionality which they have not built it. Trust me, this kind of contracts are very, very common in tenancy. I don't know how many of you actually stayed in a rented houses, but in Bangalore, if you stay in a rented house, you have to sign a contract for a year and you have to pay some amount, that is 10 months advance. And in case you will break that contract in between, then in the tenancy agreement, it's written that, okay, your owner will keep your 1 month rent. You are not staying it, but even though you are paying that 1 month rent because you broke the contract before the time. So this is the same concept, but this contract really promotes a win-win situation for both the parties. But most of the organizations are too dysfunctional to use this approach, because in this kind of contract you need to have a proper product backlog. If your product backlog is not proper, you will end up doing this development forever. Sometimes they are not able to prioritize their future according to the business value, and they are not able to trust the development team. So these are the challenges or the dysfunction in an organization where these contracts sometimes fails. Then comes another popular one, which is called as time and material.
Just a time check. We got like 3 more minutes and we got one question for you.
Okay. So, okay, let me go to the quickly then. Okay, the time and material is actually a wrongly considered agile contract. So these are not agile contracts, to be really very frank. Why? Because these contracts are, though they are simple, but most of the time the whole risk is on the supplier side. Oh, whole risk is on the client side, I'm sorry. So that is the reason why these contracts are not really very agile contract. The first variant that comes that can promote agility in this kind of contracts is the iterative and incremental time and material. It's a kind of contract that get aligned to the agile way of work. This describes the functional deliverable at the end of every sprint, and then you calculate the cost of sprint. It counts for the engineering practices that can help incorporate changes in the future. This provides with the possibility of ending the project after any sprint, with or without cost. And it also accounts for some risk sharing. Next comes your price per story point. This is also, I have seen quite common in the industry, which is into service mode. So these variants talk about the incentivizing the delivery of working software as soon as possible. Deliver more story points and get paid accordingly. And this talks about changes are welcome as long as you pay for them. And sometimes this is a bit challenging as to define what the story point is. So a lot of challenges comes in this kind of contracts. Now then comes some contracts which actually promotes agile way of working, and there are some custom created contracts that believe to promote agility and have proved it in many product developments. So there are many names or approaches which has been given to these kind of contracts, which is kind of like target cost, not to exceed, fixed fee, share profit, lean approach. As always, what is more important is principles and not specific tools. Now the contracts that promote agility are progressive, that is iterative and incremental. Shared risk, profit, incentives, win-win behavior. They show this kind of attributes. They assume positive intentions and client-supplier collaboration. They limit the chance of opportunistic behavior. It's not like that, okay, you can make money out of a supplier or client try to save most of the cost. So they limit these kind of chances. So there are some contracts for the new product development where parties contract on a fixed scope. That was something dual stage. They'll go with the fixed mode, they build the trust, and then they'll move to the T&M. And another which is very popular is called as JAWS bucket, which is coined by ThoughtWorks. And it's another variant to deal with the uncertainty, which takes into consideration for buffer from the client as well as supplier side. Clients keep a buffer for the additional scope, if at all there'll be any, and the supplier keeps a buffer for any re-estimation or unidentified tasks. So I'm having one more slide, which is more on to the contract variants, which are like cost plus, fee constraint, incentive, award, percentage of cost. But okay, in the interest of time, we can always read about this. You can call it as a cost reimbursement or cost plus contracts. You can read about that. And if at all I have to take a final step on this, then I can see that, okay, I'm almost done. So agile approach is more about shared risk and benefits, inception, high level of definition of scope, target scope, collaboration, incentivizing deliveries, and early finish of the project. These are some points that you can keep in your contracts to promote agility. Finally, thanks Sanjay. Thank you very much for giving me this chance. First of all, thanks to Agile team for making it happen. Thanks to my mentor Naveen, who actually gave me this much knowledge about the contracts. Because I'm a CEO, I have to learn the contracting point. So the reference which I have picked up, it is from the contract management from PMI, and there's an improvement 2.1. That's also one place where a lot of contractual stuff comes. So open now.
Thanks a lot, Sumeet. This was really interesting, and one of the questions that have always intrigued me, and like you had a lot of insight. So we have a very interesting question here on the question board. I'll read it out. It's from Binaya Kumar Patel.
Okay.
He says an organization trying to adopt Agile and is in an output-based contract with a customer. Do they need any change in contract? What the client can do in terms of contract for a win-win situation?
Okay. Now, for me, it is very important to understand what that word output means over there. That is something that a friend of mine has to clarify me. Because if it is output is only to create something, then yes, there are a lot of variants. But if at all you're talking about the, creating an impact with that output, I don't know if it will fall into Agile contracting. So it's very important for me to understand that word, first of all. I'm really sorry. I don't know how should I answer that question. But yes, I have a further question on that. But is there any other question?
That's all the question we got. Looks like I see a lot of difficult questions coming your way. So
okay. So guys, feel free. I'm reachable. Most of you are actually having my contact number also, because I know few people who were actually asking me. And I'm available at sumeet@agilemania.com. Feel free to drop your question to me. And if I will get time, I will definitely reply. And I'm really sorry because I'm eating your lunch hours.